Hello and welcome to my final Com480 project. This is a conversation about the thoughts and questions I have surrounding Adnan Syed's investigation, his trial, and conviction. I also explore the impact of media coverage and the contribution to his possible freedom. To fill you in a little on the case, this is Adnan Syed at age 16, only months before his life was turned upside down, and he was accused of strangling his ex-girlfriend Hae Min Lee. The quick synopsis of the mostly undisputed facts is that Hae went missing January 13, 1999, and about a month later her body was found in the Lincoln Park by a man who went into the woods to urinate. The discovery of the body was announced publicly, and a few days later, an anonymous phone call came in to the police and pointed the finger at Adnan. The police subpoenaed his phone records, and he was arrested as the prime suspect shortly after. Once Adnan was detained, the investigation was full-blown and police questioned several students, teachers, family members, and community members. According to records, there were multiple witnesses with various timelines and stories, along with a fair amount of evidence and plenty of drama. Adnan was officially charged with murder, kidnapping, and robbery, and false imprisonment in the death of Hae Min Lee. But really, who cares? The story was over and done with 20 years ago, and for that matter, it didn't get much attention then, so why now? Well, apparently lots of people care. As soon as Serial, the investigative journalist podcast, aired back in 2014, people started downloading like crazy, despite the seemingly irrelevance of the story. So far, over 175 million people have downloaded the podcast, and it has sparked so much discussion online that HBO decided the fan base was enough to warrant a follow-up documentary called The Case Against Adnan Syed. In fact, this case has gotten so much publicity that it's even helped Adnan's push for retrial. This definitely says something about the power of media in today's market. So here's my take on the Serial podcast. I found it highly entertaining. I really enjoyed the suspense of each episode. But even though I enjoyed it, I still believe there's something off-putting about listening to entertainment that's based on a real story. Hae's family are real people, and a real person died. And because of this publicity, they're forced, in a sense, to relive the experience. And I don't think that's right. The investigative journalism that Sarah Cohen demonstrates in Serial has the ability to bring attention to the broken parts of the judicial system, and the fact that so many people are interested has real potential to make the system more transparent and efficient. If Adnan really is innocent, Sarah Cohen's investigative journalism can help him earn his freedom. On the same token, it's important to realize that if Adnan is guilty, the same journalism can set him free. Above all, investigative journalists seek the truth. They dig deep to unveil details and spend a great deal of time and often money to do this. In the case of Adnan Syed, Sarah Cohen didn't just look into the information available at the trial. She wanted to know the characters of the people involved and wanted to really understand the dynamics of Woodlawn High School and Baltimore County at the time. Details like this are important because, unlike trial investigations, the goal is to find out what really happened. In this case, Sarah Cohen was not able to determine whether or not Adnan killed Hae, but she did introduce reasonable doubt. It was 20 years too late, but still the same, this information can help free him later on. The problem with Adnan's trial is that his defense attorney, Christina Gutierrez, didn't do a great job, or even a good job, and given the information provided in Serial regarding insistence on large cash payments, her malpractice investigations, as well as her voluntary disbarment, it's fair to say that something shady was going on. Or at the very least, she was starting to lose her mind towards the end. It's known that Gutierrez died only about 3 years after Adnan's trial, and towards the end it was reported that her mental faculties severely waned, as in forgetting her son's name bad. So I, as a reasonable person, could assume that given a different defense, Adnan could have made it out. I'm sure if OJ's lawyer was involved, Adnan would have been skipping out of the courtroom. On the other hand, the first trial was granted a mistrial because Gutierrez was loud and boisterous when addressing the judge in front of the jury and claimed that she didn't know about cell records. At this time, she loudly inferred that the judge called her a liar. All the jury heard and therefore tainted their objectiveness. If this is true, Christina wasn't incompetent. She was crafty and she was stalling. And with that, her tactics just didn't work. That is entirely different than being incompetent. The other leg of the problem with this case is with the justice system itself. Unlike investigative journalism that starts with scraps and follows the breadcrumb trails, criminal investigation starts with a major suspect and finding enough evidence to detain and convict that suspect. The problem with this is the system is far too swift to get to the bottom of truth. And for that matter, time and money is surely a factor. But they aren't really seeking the truth. It's simply about finding the most likely suspect and deciding whether the prosecution has proven the elements of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. Simply put, the conviction or release of a person depends on which side is better, the defense or the prosecution. So as much as we would like it to be about seeking justice for victims or finding the real killers, it isn't. That isn't how the system works. The case against Adnan was made strongest, according to Prosecutor Ulrich, with the cell phone records and pinging record. This, along with Jay Wilde's testimony and confession, placed Adnan at the scene. Jay's testimony has been widely scrutinized for being inconsistent, but police have worked out that this is common for accomplices. He stated that the typical behavior is to first deny any connection and then, upon further questioning, give half-truths. Jay's testimony had many inconsistencies, but the ones that mattered were consistent. This is one of the hardest things for me to swallow regarding the justice system. I understand that there's never enough time and money to go down every avenue and that they do it this way, for lack of a better term, to get the bigger bad guy. This time it's Adnan because he was the most likely suspect and he's the person who's being accused of actually killing Hay, not just orchestrating it. But just because I understand how the system works, it doesn't make me any less frustrated when I see things that don't add up. On the other hand, I was not at the trial and I'm only seeing internet content, and we all know how that goes. But for me, here are some things that don't add up. Police and the prosecution were not concerned with finding out Jay's true involvement. They had Adnan and wanted only enough information to convict him. If I had it my way, Jay and Jen would have been further investigated, as well as Bilal Ahmed. The latter, Bilal, was overlooked, in my opinion, by Serial and most of the internet. I believe his role was downplayed due to his court case and accusations of pedophilia and grooming young members of Adnan's mosque. But interestingly enough, he was also defended by the same attorney, Christina Gutierrez. Most importantly, he's also the same person who signed Adnan up for his cell phone and put him on his plan a day before Hay was murdered. Anything I have to say regarding this would be speculation, and I don't want to go there, but it raises a big red flag for me, and the whole thing just seems suspicious. I also have some questions about the DNA results. It seems like it was only partially tested for semen, but not DNA. I'm curious as to why this was. Assuming Adnan was innocent, it would seem like a no-brainer as far as looking into it goes. My thoughts are that either Cristina Gutierrez carefully decided not to pursue for either the reason that she either knew Anand was guilty or threw the trial on purpose to make more money on the appeal. Either that or she entirely overlooked it. But I don't think the latter is likely, because even though she was sick a few years later, at the time she still fought tooth and nail over the case. And today, we see that Adnan embraces further DNA testing. But to play the devil's advocate, let's say he did strangle her and he knew he didn't rape her. He would know that his DNA wouldn't be there in the same way that it wouldn't be there if he didn't do it. And if the test comes back inconclusive, it still helps his case, and it shows that he has nothing to hide. I feel the same way about the Asia McClain alibi. At first, Adnan seemed dismissive to Sarah Koenig at the idea of contacting her. And now it's the fulcrum of his defense for retrial. It doesn't make sense and leaves a lot of questions for me. I'm not sure whether Asia got her dates mixed up, was coerced by Adnan's family, or was just seeking attention. Prosecutor Ulrich says that she told him she was under a lot of pressure from Adnan's family, and to get them off her back, she wrote him a couple of letters. The implication was that she was trying to appease them, and she didn't want to have to stick by it at that time. This could have just as easily meant that she wanted to be left out of the trial entirely. Asia seemed to declare his innocence in one sentence, and in the next say, yeah, but if you're guilty, I'm going to kick your ass. So her flip-flop stance probably wouldn't even help his trial. Not to mention, Adnan didn't even mention the library in his initial testimonies. On the other hand, while I believe that Asia should have been questioned by the police, or at the very least Adnan's defense, there might have been a very logical reason for this omission. It's easy to write all these omissions off as mistakes, but there might be something more to it than that. The snippets I saw from the court and process seemed like Cristina was going off track and losing focus a bit with lots of yelling. After I reflected on that coverage, I could easily dismiss her as crazy, but I also realized that attorneys sometimes have strategies that the common people are not familiar with, such as stall tactics, constant objections, or even boring the other side to the point where it throws them off their game. I think that what a lot of armchair detectives forget is that real-life court and investigations are not like TV. They're not wrapped up with a pretty little bow and an open and shut case. They're often a lot more difficult to solve. You're just not going to see who done it right away. But back to what the case did focus on. In the Serial podcast, Cohen claims that the prosecution built the case on the idea that Adnan was an empty shell of a kid who betrayed his family and his religion, and that he was left with nothing. Therefore, he conjured up a murderous rage for a girl that broke his heart. The prosecution wasn't quite so dramatic. They originally looked into Adnan because of an anonymous tip, but the idea that the murder was committed by an ex is nothing new. In fact, looking into current and ex-partners is one of the first steps police often take. That's because statistics state that around 55% of murders of women in the U.S. occur directly at the hands of a former or current partner or their family and friends. So it isn't off the mark for Adnan to be a suspect in the first place.